Ji-hoon stood at attention in the grand hall of the Eternal Dawn, trying not to stare at the walls. They were made of something that looked like crystal, but they shifted colors slowly, moving from deep blue to soft purple. He had never seen anything like it back on Earth. Everything here was beautiful and strange. The Velkari Empire controlled 14 star systems. Their technology was hundreds of years ahead of humanity's. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days, their weapons could destroy planets, and their empress was walking toward him right now. Empress Lyrae was tall and elegant. Her skin had a faint glow to it, like she had swallowed starlight. It changed colors based on her mood, or so Ji-hoon had been told. Right now it was a calm silver blue. She wore robes that seemed to float around her, and her eyes were large and completely black, like pools of deep space. "You are the human advisor," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, Your Majesty. Lieutenant Ji-hoon of Earth's Defense Corps." He bowed the way he had been taught. She looked at him with curiosity. "Your people are very new to space travel. Why did they send soldiers?" Ji-hoon kept his face neutral. "We're good at adapting, Your Majesty. We thought we could learn from your military and perhaps offer our own perspective." One of the Velkari commanders nearby made a sound that might have been a laugh. Commander Vex was tall even for his species, and his skin glowed a confident gold. "Perspective? From a species that still uses chemical propulsion? How charming." Ji-hoon said nothing. He had dealt with arrogant officers before. But Empress Lyrae raised one delicate hand. "Commander Vex, our human guests are here by invitation. They deserve respect." Her skin flickered briefly to orange, which Ji-hoon guessed meant she was annoyed. Vex bowed. "Of course, Your Majesty." The Empress turned back to Ji-hoon. "You will be assigned to my personal guard detail. You will observe our operations and provide reports to your superiors on Earth. Is this acceptable?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm honored." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good. Welcome to the Eternal Dawn, Lieutenant Ji-hoon." The first few weeks were difficult. Ji-hoon and the other humans on board, there were 250 of them total, were treated like interesting pets. The Velkari were polite but distant. They spoke to humans the way adults might speak to clever children. Ji-hoon's job was to stand near the Empress during meetings and watch. He wasn't asked for opinions. He wasn't given important tasks. He was just there, a curiosity from a primitive world. But he watched everything and learned quickly. The Velkari had built their empire over thousands of years. They valued art, philosophy, and long-term planning. They saw themselves as the peak of civilization. War to them was something to be managed efficiently with superior technology. They had never lost a major conflict. Yuna, the human communications officer, sat with Ji-hoon in the mess hall one evening. She was young and bright, always optimistic even when the Velkari ignored her. "Do you think they'll ever take us seriously?" she asked. Ji-hoon shrugged. "Maybe. We just need to prove we're worth listening to." "How?" "They won't let us do anything important. We wait, and we learn." Daiho, Ji-hoon's second-in-command, joined them with his food tray. He was a practical man, older than Ji-hoon, with gray in his hair. "I heard Commander Vex talking today. He said humans are useful as expendable shock troops if they ever need ground forces." Yuna's face fell. "That's terrible." "That's reality," Daiho said. "We're the new kids in the galaxy. We have to earn our place." But Ji-hoon noticed something interesting. While most Velkari treated humans as inferiors, Empress Lyrae was different. She asked questions, real questions. One day, she summoned him to her private chamber. It was a beautiful room filled with plants from a dozen different worlds. She sat on a chair that seemed to grow from the floor itself. "Sit, please," she said, gesturing to another chair. Ji-hoon sat carefully. "How can I help you, Your Majesty?" "I want to understand something about your people," she said. Your planet has only been unified for 20 years. Before that, you fought each other constantly. Why? Ji-hoon thought about how to answer. We're a young species, Your Majesty. We make mistakes. We fight over resources, beliefs, territory, but we learn from those mistakes. The Velkari unified 6,000 years ago, she said. We find your constant conflicts confusing, inefficient. Maybe, Ji-hoon said carefully, but those conflicts taught us things. How to survive when everything goes wrong, how to adapt quickly, how to fight when the odds are impossible. Her skin shifted to a curious purple. You sound proud of your wars. Not proud, but I won't pretend they didn't shape us. Humans are survivors, Your Majesty. We don't give up easily. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me about Earth. What is it like? So Ji-hoon told her. He described blue oceans and green forests, cities of glass and steel, mountains that touched the clouds. He told her about music and art, about families gathering for meals, about children playing in parks. She listened with genuine interest. When he finished, she smiled, the first real smile he had seen from any Velkari. Your world sounds beautiful, she said. Chaotic, but beautiful. It is, Your Majesty. Call me Lyrae when we're alone, she said. I grow tired of formality sometimes. Ji-hoon was surprised, but bowed his head. As you wish. From that day on, Lyrae would sometimes call him to her chambers. They would talk about strategy, culture, and philosophy. She valued his perspective, even when it differed from Velkari thinking. She was kind in a way that seemed rare among her people. But Ji-hoon also saw the darker side of the Empire. The Velkari were beautiful and refined, but beneath that beauty was ruthless calculation. Worlds that resisted their rule were conquered. Species that couldn't contribute were ignored or used. Commander Vex embodied this perfectly. He was brilliant and efficient, but he saw everything in terms of utility. Humans, to him, were tools to be used and discarded. 3 months into Ji-hoon's assignment, strange reports started coming in. Ships were disappearing at the edge of Velkari space. Entire colonies went silent. No distress calls, no wreckage, just silence. Ji-hoon stood in the command center as Lyrae reviewed the data. Her skin was a troubled gray. What could do this? She asked her advisors. Pirates, Vex suggested. Or a malfunction in the communication network. But Ji-hoon felt a chill run down his spine. Something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. Your Majesty, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. On Earth, when prey animals disappear without a trace, it usually means there's a new predator. Vex laughed. This is space, human, not your primitive forests. But Lyrae's skin shifted to orange. He has a point. Send scout ships to investigate. I want answers. The scout ships were dispatched to 3 different locations where colonies had gone dark. They carried the best sensors in the Velkari fleet. They were crewed by experienced officers. None of them ever reported back. And then, at the very edge of the Empire's territory, long-range sensors detected something massive moving through space. Thousands of ships, unlike anything in any database. They were organic, living vessels that pulsed with strange light. They were heading toward the heart of the Velkari Empire. War was coming. The Third Fleet died screaming. Ji-hoon watched the recordings in horror. The Velkari ships had met the unknown enemy at the Korvast system, a mining colony on the edge of the Empire. The Third Fleet was one of the most powerful forces in Velkari space, 200 warships armed with weapons that could shatter moons. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The enemy ships were like nothing anyone had seen before. They weren't metal and circuits. They were alive. Massive organic vessels covered in what looked like armor plating made of bone and chitin. They moved like schools of fish, perfectly coordinated, responding to threats with impossible speed. When Velkari energy weapons hit them, the creatures screamed, not through speakers or radios, but directly into space somehow. The sound could be heard on sensors, a terrible wailing that made Ji-hoon's skin crawl even watching the recording. And they learned. The first wave of Velkari fire was devastating. Ships exploded in bursts of green flame, but the second wave was less effective. By the third wave, the creatures had adapted. Their armor changed, became reflective. Energy beams that should have cut through them simply bounced off. Then the creatures attacked. They swarmed the Velkari ships like insects covering prey. Smaller organisms latched onto hulls and began eating through them. Larger vessels fired biological projectiles that exploded on impact, spreading acid that melted armor. The biggest creatures simply rammed into ships, tearing them apart with massive claws and teeth. The Third Fleet tried to retreat. Half the ships made it to hyperspace. The other half was consumed. "What are they?" Lyrae asked. Her skin was pale, almost white with fear. "A hive mind," said one of the science officers. "They share information instantly. Every ship is part of one massive intelligence. The swarm, our computers are calling them." "Can we fight them?" The officer hesitated. "I don't know, Your Majesty." Commander Vex stepped forward. His skin was bright gold, confident despite the disaster. "We can fight anything. We are the Velkari Empire. We have technology these creatures cannot match. The Third Fleet was simply unprepared. We will mobilize the full military and crush this swarm." Lyrae looked at Ji-hoon. "What do you think, Lieutenant?" All eyes turned to him. Ji-hoon felt the weight of the moment. He chose his words carefully. "On Earth, we've dealt with swarms, locusts, insects, sometimes even fish or birds that move in massive groups. The key is that they adapt to patterns. If you use the same tactic twice, they learn to counter it." Vex scoffed. "These are not insects, human." "No," Ji-hoon agreed. "They're worse. They're insects with starships." Lyrae's skin shifted to thoughtful purple. "Go on. If they learn from every attack, then using our strongest weapons first might be a mistake. They'll adapt to them. We need to vary our tactics constantly. Never let them predict what we'll do next." "Chaos as strategy?" Vex said mockingly. "How very human. We Velkari prefer precision and order." "Your precision just lost you the Third Fleet," Ji-hoon said quietly. The room went silent. Speaking to a Velkari commander that way could be considered an insult, but Lyrae raised her hand before Vex could respond. "He's right. We need to think differently. Commander Vex, mobilize every ship we have, every fleet, every defense station, every ally we can call upon. This enemy must not reach our core worlds." Vex bowed stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." The Eternal Dawn became the center of the largest military operation in Velkari history. Ships poured in from across the Empire. Allies sent forces, the graceful ships of the Terran, the heavy cruisers of the Voloth, the small but deadly fighters of the Kree. The human contingent was almost forgotten in the chaos. 250 soldiers with primitive kinetic weapons and simple armor. They were assigned to the Eternal Dawn's security detail, guarding corridors and checking cargo. Yuna found Ji-hoon in the armory, checking his rifle. "Do you really think we can win?" she asked. Ji-hoon looked at the weapon in his hands. It fired metal bullets using controlled explosions. Simple, primitive, but reliable. "I think we're going to find out." Daiho joined them, his face grim. "I heard the swarm destroyed another colony. Took them 30 minutes this time. They're getting better at it." "Or there's more of them," Yuna said quietly. The fleet assembled at the Korvast system. It was the largest gathering of military power in known space. Over 3,000 ships from a dozen species, all under Velkari command. The Eternal Dawn sat at the center, a glittering palace ship surrounded by weapons of war. Lyrae stood on her command deck, looking at the displays. Ji-hoon was there, standing at his post near the wall. She glanced at him, and for a moment her skin showed a flash of fear before returning to determined blue. "They're coming," an officer announced. The swarm emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. There were thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. The bioships came in every size, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts larger than anything the Velkari had built. They pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, and they screamed their silent scream across all frequencies. Vex gave the order. "All ships, fire at will." The combined fleet opened up with everything they had. Energy beams, missiles, kinetic weapons, exotic particle cannons that bent space itself. The void lit up like a supernova. The first wave of swarm ships died. Thousands of them burst apart, their organic matter freezing in the vacuum of space. But there were so many more, and they were learning. The second wave was harder to kill. Their armor adapted. Ships that should have died from direct hits simply absorbed the damage and kept coming. The swarm adjusted their formations, spreading out to make targeting harder. The third wave hardly died at all. "They're adapting too fast," an officer shouted. "Change frequency on all energy weapons," Vex ordered. "Switch to alternating fire patterns." It helped, but not enough. The swarm closed the distance and began their terrible work. Bioships latched onto hulls. Smaller organisms crawled across armor. Acid ate through shields. Ships began to die. Ji-hoon watched a Terran cruiser get swarmed by hundreds of small organisms. They covered it completely, and then the ship just dissolved, turned into organic matter that the swarm absorbed. "Your Majesty," Ji-hoon said urgently, "they're not just killing ships, they're eating them, taking the mass and making more of themselves." Lyray's skin went pale. "Then every ship they destroy makes them stronger." "Exactly." Commander Vex was shouting orders, trying to coordinate the fleet. But the swarm was everywhere. They hit weak points with perfect precision. They targeted command ships first, cutting off coordination. They used the debris of destroyed vessels as cover. The Allied fleet was the most powerful force in known space, and it was losing. "All ships fall back to defensive formation beta," Vex commanded. "Protect the Eternal Dawn." But the other species had seen enough. The Terran ships jumped to hyperspace first, then the Voloth, then the Kree. Within minutes, half the Allied fleet had abandoned the battle. "Cowards!" Vex roared. His skin flashed red with fury. "They're survivors," Ji-hoon said quietly. "They know a losing fight when they see one." The remaining Velkari ships fought desperately, but the swarm was relentless. For every bioship destroyed, 3 more took its place, and they were still learning, still adapting. A massive swarm dreadnought broke through the defensive line. It headed straight for the Eternal Dawn, its massive jaws opening to reveal rows of teeth the size of buildings. "Concentrate all fire on that ship," Vex ordered. Every weapon on the Velkari flagship hit the creature at once. For a moment, it seemed to work. The dreadnought's armor cracked, it slowed, then it roared that terrible, soundless scream and kept coming. "Brace for impact!" someone shouted. But the impact never came. A dozen Velkari cruisers threw themselves between the Eternal Dawn and the dreadnought. They fired point blank, sacrificing themselves to stop the creature. It worked. The dreadnought died. But so did the cruisers. Lyrae stood frozen, watching her people die to protect her. "Your Majesty," Vex said, his voice strained. "We need to retreat. We've lost 40% of our forces. If we stay, we'll lose everything." She looked at the tactical display. Red icons everywhere, showing dead ships. So many dead ships. "Order the retreat," she whispered. The surviving Velkari fleet jumped to hyperspace, fleeing toward the capital system. Behind them, the swarm consumed the remains of the battle, fed, grew stronger, and followed. The fleet limped back to Velkara Prime like wounded animals crawling home to die. Ji-hoon walked through the corridors of the Eternal Dawn and saw fear in every Velkari face. Their skin showed colors he had never seen before, dark grays and sickly greens that spoke of terror and despair. These were people who had never known defeat. Now they knew nothing else. The capital system was in chaos. Ships poured in from every corner of the empire, fleeing the advancing swarm. Civilian transports mixed with military vessels. Everyone was running, trying to get behind the defensive lines being hastily assembled around the homeworld. Lyrae called an emergency council in the Grand Chamber. Ji-hoon stood at his post, watching the Velkari leadership argue. "We must evacuate the outer colonies," one admiral said. "Bring everyone to the core systems where we can defend them." "Impossible," another replied. "We don't have enough ships. Billions would be left behind." "Then billions will die," the first admiral said flatly. "Better to save some than lose all." Lyrae's skin flickered between colors, blue for sadness, orange for anger, white for fear. She looked tired. In just a few days, she had aged in a way that had nothing to do with time. "We cannot abandon our people," she said. Commander Vex stepped forward. His skin was no longer confident gold. It was a dull bronze, the color of resignation. "Your Majesty, we must face reality. The swarm is unstoppable. It learns from everything we do. Our weapons are useless. Our tactics are useless. We need to preserve what we can and establish a defensive perimeter around the core worlds." "You want to give up?" Lyrae asked, her voice dangerous. "I want to survive," Vex said. "We can rebuild. In time we can develop new weapons, but only if we survive." Other voices joined in, agreeing with Vex. The mood in the chamber was dark. These proud beings who had ruled the stars for thousands of years were ready to sacrifice their own people to save themselves. Ji-hoon felt sick. He glanced at Yuna and Daeho, who stood nearby. They looked disgusted, too. "What about asking for help?" Lyrae said desperately. "The other empires have already refused," an advisor interrupted. "The Terran Collective has closed its borders. The Voloth hegemony is doing the same. No one wants to fight the swarm. They're hoping it will be satisfied consuming us." "Then we stand alone," Lyrae said quietly. "Not alone, Your Majesty," Vex said. "We still have our fleet. We still have our technology. We just need to use it wisely. Sacrifice the outer worlds. Bring everything to Velkara Prime. Make our last stand here." Lyrae looked around the chamber. Most of the council was nodding. They wanted to survive, even if it meant abandoning half their empire. She looked at Ji-hoon. He met her eyes and gave a tiny shake of his head. "Don't give up," he tried to say without words, but she looked away. "Very well," she said, her voice hollow. "Begin the evacuation of the core systems. All military assets fall back to Velkara Prime. We make our stand here." The orders went out. Ships scattered across the empire tried to return home. But the swarm was faster. It spread like a plague, consuming world after world. Reports came in of colonies going dark, of desperate last stands, of billions dying. Ji-hoon found Lyrae in her chambers 3 days later. She was standing by a window looking out at her homeworld. Velkara Prime was beautiful, a planet of silver cities and crystalline oceans. "They're 4 days away," she said without turning around. "The swarm. We've tracked their advance. 4 days until they reach this system." Ji-hoon stood beside her. "We're not done fighting yet." "Aren't we?" She turned to face him. Her skin was almost completely white. "Ji-hoon, we've lost 70% of our military. The species we called allies have abandoned us. My own people want to save themselves instead of protecting the empire. What is left to fight for?" "Your people," Ji-hoon said simply, "the ones who are counting on you." "I'm going to let them down," she whispered. I'm going to watch them die. Maybe, but you'll die fighting to protect them. That counts for something. She looked at him with those deep black eyes. Why do you stay, Ji-hoon? You could take your people and leave. No one would blame you. This isn't your fight. Ji-hoon thought about that. You treated us with respect when nobody else did. You listened when we spoke. You made us feel like we mattered. On Earth, we have a saying, you don't abandon your friends. Her skin shifted to a soft blue. The color of sadness and gratitude mixed together. Friends, I like that. The swarm arrived early. Ji-hoon was in the command center when the alarms began screaming. The bioships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. There were more of them now, so many more. They had grown fat on Valkyrie worlds, consuming everything in their path. All ships to battle stations, Vex ordered. He sounded tired, defeated. Prepare for final defensive formation. The Valkyrie fleet was positioned around the homeworld. 800 ships, all that remained of the once mighty empire. They faced a swarm that numbered in the tens of thousands. The battle began badly and got worse. The swarm had learned everything from the previous fights. Valkyrie energy weapons barely scratched them now. Their armor had adapted to every frequency, every weapon type. The bioships moved with perfect coordination, hitting weak points, targeting critical systems. Valkyrie ships died by the dozens. We're not even slowing them down, an officer reported, his voice breaking. Ji-hoon watched the tactical display. The swarm was pressing in from all sides, encircling the planet. They were going to win. It was just a matter of time. A massive swarm formation broke through the defensive line and headed straight for the eternal dawn. All ships, protect the flagship, Vex commanded. 3 battleships moved to intercept. They fired everything they had, buying time with their own destruction. It was brave. It was noble. It wasn't enough. The swarm formation punched through and surrounded the eternal dawn. Smaller bioships latched onto the hull. Warning lights flashed as they began eating through the armor. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, someone reported. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but... We need reinforcements now, another officer shouted. But no reinforcements came. Ji-hoon saw it on the tactical display. One by one, Valkyrie ships were jumping to hyperspace, running. The captains had decided that saving their ships was more important than protecting their empress. Commander Vex saw it too. His skin flashed red, then faded to gray. Your Majesty, the fleet is breaking. We need to evacuate. There's still time. No, Lyrae said. Her voice was steady now, calm. I will not abandon my people on the surface. If I die here. Vex stared at her for a long moment. Then he bowed. As you wish, Your Majesty. It has been an honor to serve you. He walked to the exit. His honor guard followed him. They were heading for the escape pods. Within minutes, most of the Valkyrie crew had fled. Even the elite guards, the ones sworn to protect the Empress with their lives, ran to save themselves. The ship that had held thousands now held only a few hundred, and all of them were human. Daeho found Ji-hoon in the command center. The Valkyrie are gone. Every last one except the Empress. What do we do? Ji-hoon looked at Lyrae. She stood alone on her command platform, watching her empire collapse on the screens. She looked so small, so fragile. We stay, Ji-hoon said. Yuna appeared, breathless from running. Lieutenant, the escape pods are still available. We stay, Ji-hoon repeated, louder this time. He activated his communicator, broadcasting to every human on the ship. This is Lieutenant Ji-hoon to all personnel. The Valkyrie have abandoned ship. The Empress remains. I'm staying to protect her. Anyone who wants to leave, go now. No one will think less of you. This isn't our empire. This isn't our fight. He waited. The communicator was silent. Then Daeho spoke. I'm staying. Me too, Yuna said. One by one, every human soldier on the ship reported in. All 250 of them. Not one left. Ji-hun looked at Lee. She was staring at him, her skin cycling through colors he couldn't identify. Shock, wonder, gratitude. Why? She asked. Why would you stay? Because you're worth protecting, Ji-hun said simply. Now, with respect, Your Majesty, get off my battlefield. We have work to do. For the first time in days, Lee smiled. As you command, Lieutenant? The swarm bioships were already inside the hull, crawling through corridors like a plague. Outside, the last Velkari ships jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Eternal Dawn alone in a sea of enemies. Ji-hun checked his rifle and looked at his soldiers. 250 humans against an army of monsters. All right, he said. Let's show these things what humans do best. What's that, sir? Someone asked. Ji-hun smiled grimly. Survive. The first wave hit Deck 7. Ji-hun had positioned his soldiers at key choke points throughout the ship. Every corridor, every junction, every doorway that led toward the command center now had humans with guns waiting. The swarm creatures came in a flood of chitin and teeth. They were the size of dogs, moving on 6 legs, with heads that were mostly jaws. They screeched as they charged, a sound that made human ears ring. Wait for it, Ji-hun said calmly into his communicator. Wait! The creatures poured into the corridor, 50 of them, 100. More. Now! The humans opened fire. The Velkari had energy weapons that could pierce armor and melt metal. They were sophisticated, elegant, advanced. Human weapons were simple, rifles that used controlled explosions to throw pieces of metal very fast. Nothing elegant about them, nothing sophisticated. But they worked. The bullets tore through the creatures like a storm. The swarm had adapted to energy weapons, had grown armor that could deflect and absorb them. But they had never encountered kinetic weapons. The creature's armor might as well have been paper. They died in heaps. Reload! Someone shouted. The human soldiers worked with practiced efficiency. Empty magazines dropped. New ones slammed home. The firing never stopped. The swarm kept coming, and the humans kept killing them. Ji-hun watched the tactical display. The creatures were hitting 3 other decks, too. His soldiers were holding everywhere, for now. Daeho, status report, he said into his communicator. We're holding Deck 9, sir, but there's a lot of them. A lot. Conserve ammo. Short controlled bursts. Make every shot count. Understood. Yuna's voice came through. Lieutenant, I've been analyzing their attack pattern. They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to get past us. They want the command center. Ji-hun understood. The swarm was a hive mind. It was trying to cut off the head. If they took the command center, the Eternal Dawn would be helpless. All units, hold your positions no matter what. They cannot get through. The battle raged for an hour. The humans fought with discipline and precision. Every time a wave of creatures charged, human bullets cut them down. The corridors filled with alien bodies. But the swarm learned fast. The second hour, the creatures came differently. They used the bodies of their dead as shields. They dodged and weaved instead of charging straight. They were adapting to the human tactics. They're getting smarter, Daeho reported. We're using more ammo to kill the same number. Ji-hun's mind raced. The swarm had one advantage. They could learn and share information instantly. But they also had a weakness. They were predictable in one way. They always adapted to what they experienced. Listen up, he said to all units. Stop using full auto. Switch to semi-automatic. Aim for the heads. Single shots, make them count. We need to change our pattern before they fully adapt. The humans adjusted. The rate of fire dropped, but the accuracy increased. Creatures died from single shots instead of bursts. The swarm tried to adapt to this too, protecting their heads with armored limbs. So Ji-hun had his soldiers aim for the legs, drop them, then finish them. It became a deadly dance. The swarm would adapt to one tactic. The humans would switch to another. Back and forth, hour after hour. But humans got tired. They ran out of ammunition. They made mistakes. "Lieutenant, we've lost Deck 12, someone reported. "They broke through. Johnson's squad is gone." Ji-hoon felt the loss like a punch to the gut, but he couldn't stop, couldn't mourn. Not yet. "Fall back to secondary positions. Rig Deck 12 to blow." The humans had brought demolition charges. Simple plastic explosives, not sophisticated Valkyrie tech. But they were effective. When the swarm poured into Deck 12, the humans triggered the charges. The entire deck depressurized, venting into space. Hundreds of creatures were sucked out into the void. "We can't do that many more times," Daeho warned. "We'll run out of ship." Ji-hoon knew he was right. They were trading deck for time. Eventually, they would run out of both. Lyrae appeared beside him in the command center. She was wearing simple clothes now, not her elegant robes. And she was carrying a human rifle. "Show me how to use this," she said. Ji-hoon wanted to argue, to tell her to stay safe, but he saw the look in her eyes. She needed this. Needed to fight for her people instead of just watching them die. "This is the safety," he said, showing her. "This is the trigger. Aim here. Squeeze gently, don't pull. The recoil will push back, so brace yourself." She nodded, absorbing every word. A breach alarm sounded. Creatures had broken through on Deck 5, close to the command center. "Stay behind me," Ji-hoon ordered Lyrae. They moved to the breach point with a squad of 10 soldiers. The creatures were pouring through a hole in the wall, dozens of them. The humans opened fire. Lyrae aimed carefully and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard, surprising her. Her shot went wide. "Brace your shoulder better," Ji-hoon said while shooting, "and breathe out as you fire." She tried again. This time she hit a creature in the side. It went down. Her skin flashed bright blue, the color of fierce joy. She fired again and again. They held the breach for 20 minutes until Daeho arrived with welding equipment. They sealed the hole while the soldiers provided covering fire. But more breaches opened. The swarm was everywhere, eating through the hull from the outside, pushing through corridors from the inside. "We're losing," Yuna said quietly, watching the tactical display. "Even if we kill them all, more keep coming." Ji-hoon looked at the display. She was right. For every creature they killed, 10 more latched onto the ship. They were being overwhelmed. But then he noticed something. "Yuna, can you access the ship's environmental controls?" "Yes, why?" "These things are biological. They need oxygen, right?" Her eyes widened. "You want to vent the atmosphere? From the sections they've infested, suffocate them. That's actually clever. It'll take me a few minutes to reroute the controls." "Do it." While Yuna worked, Ji-hoon coordinated the defense. His soldiers were down to half ammunition. They were exhausted. Some were wounded, but not one had run. "Okay," Yuna said. "I can vent sections 7 through 15, but our people will need to evacuate first. All units fall back to Deck 5 and above. Emergency retreat, now!" The humans pulled back, sealing pressure doors behind them. Once everyone was clear, Yuna opened all the airlocks in the lower decks. The atmosphere vented in seconds. The swarm creatures that had infested those sections died, their bodies freezing in the vacuum. "It worked!" someone cheered, but the victory was brief. New creatures just landed on the hull and began cutting through to the upper decks. "We need a new plan," Daeho said. Ji-hoon thought frantically. They had killed thousands of creatures. They had used every trick they knew, but it wasn't enough. Then he had an idea, a crazy, desperate idea. "Yuna, can you overload the ship's power core?" She looked at him in shock. "That would destroy the ship. Can you make it look like we're doing it? Make the power readings spike like we're about to explode?" Understanding dawned on her face. "You want to scare them off?" Make them think they won't get anything if they destroy us. Exactly. The swarm consumes matter to grow. If they think this ship will be vaporized, maybe they'll pull back to save their forces. It's a bluff, Deho said, but it might work. They've shown intelligence. They make tactical decisions. Do it, Jaehoon ordered. Yuna's fingers flew across the controls. The ship's power core began cycling up, drawing more and more energy. Alarms screamed. The lights flickered. To anyone monitoring the eternal dawn, it looked like the ship was about to explode. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the swarm creatures began pulling back. They stopped attacking. They retreated to their bioships. "It's working," Yuna whispered. The bioships detached from the eternal dawn. They pulled away, regrouping at a safe distance. Jaehoon let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Power down the core before we accidentally do explode." But as Yuna worked, an officer monitoring long-range sensors gave a shout. "Sir, ships incoming, lots of them." "More swarm?" Jaehoon asked wearily. "No, sir. They're Velkari. It's the fleet. They're coming back." On the main screen, dozens of ships appeared, Velkari vessels returning to the battle. They weren't running anymore. They were coming home. And when the swarm saw the reinforcements, they made a choice. They began retreating, jumping to hyperspace. After 6 hours of desperate battle, it was over. Jaehoon looked at his soldiers. They were covered in blood and exhaustion. Of the 250 who had stayed, 73 were still standing. Lyra stood among them, her rifle still in her hands, her skin showing colors of relief and gratitude. "You saved us," she said to Jaehoon. "You saved me." Jaehoon shook his head. "We saved each other, Your Majesty." Outside, the Velkari fleet surrounded the Eternal Dawn, protecting their empress at last. The war room aboard the Eternal Dawn was different now. 3 months had passed since the battle, and everything had changed. Jaehoon stood at a planning table alongside Velkari admirals, going over tactical maps. They listened when he spoke now. Actually listened. Some even took notes. "The swarm has pulled back to the outer systems," he said, pointing at the display. "They're consolidating, probably analyzing what happened. They lost a lot of biomass in the failed assault on the Eternal Dawn. That means they're being careful now." Admiral Taryn, her skin a respectful silver blue, nodded. "Your defensive tactics worked when ours failed. We need to know why." "It's simple," Jaehoon explained. "You fought the way you always fought, organized, predictable, using your best weapons first. The swarm adapted to that. Humans fight differently. We adapt faster than our enemies do. We change tactics constantly. We use whatever works, even if it's crude or inelegant." Another admiral, his skin showing curious purple, asked, "But your weapons are so primitive. How did they succeed where our advanced technology failed?" Deho, now officially recognized as a military advisor, answered that one. "Because the swarm had never seen them before. They had adapted to energy weapons. They had no defense against bullets. By the time they started adapting, we changed tactics again." "Chaos as strategy," Taryn said thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to understand." Lyra entered the room. Everyone stood. Her skin was a healthy golden now, strong and confident. She looked like a true empress again. "Please sit," she said. "We have much to discuss." The briefing continued for another hour. The Velkari military was being restructured. Every fleet now had human advisors. Every tactical plan was reviewed through the lens of how would humans approach this. More importantly, the Velkari were learning human concepts, unit cohesion, loyalty, the idea that soldiers should fight for each other, not just for abstract concepts like empire. When the meeting ended, Lyra asked Jaehoon to walk with her. They strolled through the gardens aboard the ship, a beautiful space filled with plants from a dozen worlds. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said. "My people ran. Your people stayed. I need to understand why." Ji-hoon considered his answer carefully. "The Velkari are an old species. You've been civilized for thousands of years. You think in terms of preservation, long-term planning, survival of the culture. And humans? We're young. We've spent most of our history fighting just to survive. We think in terms of the moment, the people right in front of us. When my soldiers saw you standing alone, they didn't think about preserving humanity or long-term strategy. They just knew it was wrong to abandon someone who had treated them with respect." Lyray's skin showed thoughtful purple. "Is that why you stayed? Respect?" "Partly, but also because you gave us something the Velkari Empire never did before. You made us feel like we mattered, not as tools or primitive curiosities, as people worth listening to." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I owe you my life, Ji-hoon. I owe your people everything." "You don't owe us anything," he said gently. "We made a choice. That's what humans do. We choose our battles, and we choose who we fight for." 2 weeks later, a ceremony was held on Velkara Prime. The entire planet watched as Empress Lyrae stood before the 73 human survivors. One by one, she called them forward. One by one, she placed around their necks the Star of Valor, the highest military honor in the Velkari Empire. It had never been given to a non-Velkari before. When Ji-hoon stepped forward, Lyrae did something unprecedented. She bowed to him. The entire assembly gasped. An empress never bowed, not to anyone. "Lieutenant Ji-hoon," she said, her voice carrying across the plaza, "you and your people showed us what true loyalty means. You fought when you had no obligation to fight. You stayed when you had every reason to leave. You protected not just me, but the ideals that an empire should stand for." She placed the medal around his neck, then spoke quietly so only he could hear. "Thank you, my friend, for everything." After the ceremony, work began on a memorial. It was built in the heart of the capital city, a huge structure of crystalline stone. At its center stood statues of human soldiers, accurate down to the smallest detail. Their faces showed determination and courage. The inscription read, "They had no reason to stay, but they did, in honor of humanity's defenders." But the most important changes weren't monuments or medals. They were in how the Velkari saw the universe. Commander Vex had been court-martialed for abandoning his empress. He stood trial, defended himself by saying he was preserving the fleet for future battles, that his decision was logical. The court found him guilty anyway. Not of cowardice. That wasn't even a crime in Velkari law before this. He was found guilty of failing his oath. The Velkari were writing new laws, new military codes. They were based partly on human concepts of duty and loyalty. Some Velkari called it primitive thinking. Others called it necessary evolution. The war against the swarm continued, but now it was different. Velkari and human forces worked together, truly together. Velkari ships provided the advanced technology and firepower. Human soldiers provided the adaptability and tactical creativity. Together, they began pushing the swarm back. The key was unpredictability. Velkari ships would open with energy weapons. Then human fighters would close in with kinetic weapons. When the swarm adapted to that, they'd switch to bioweapons that Yuna helped develop. Then back to energy weapons with different frequencies. The swarm could still adapt, but not fast enough. Every battle cost them more than they gained. Slowly, system by system, the Velkari Empire began to reclaim what had been lost. 6 months after the Battle of the Eternal Dawn, Ji-hoon stood in Lyray's private chambers. She had called him for a quiet dinner, something they did occasionally now. "I have an offer for you," she said as they ate. "I want you to become Supreme Military Advisor to the Empire. You would have authority over all defensive operations, command respect from every admiral and general." Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. "That's A huge responsibility. You've earned it. More than earned it. You saved not just my life, but my empire's soul. What do you mean? She looked out the window at her homeworld. Before the swarm came, we were arrogant. We thought our technology made us superior. We thought we had nothing to learn from younger species. We were wrong. You taught us that strength isn't just about weapons or ships. It's about the bonds between people, about standing together when everything falls apart. We learned from you too, Ji-hoon said. Your technology, your strategic thinking. We're better for knowing the Velkari. Then accept the position. Help us build something new, an empire that values loyalty as much as logic, an alliance between our peoples that will make us both stronger. Ji-hoon thought about Earth, about his home. But he also thought about the 73 soldiers who had stayed with him, who had chosen to fight for an alien empress because it was the right thing to do. I accept, he said, on one condition. Name it. We do this as partners, not servants and masters, not primitive and advanced. As equals. Lyra smiled, her skin glowing warm gold. I would have it no other way. News of the appointment spread quickly. Some Velkari objected. A human in such a high position? Unthinkable, but most understood. They had watched the recordings of the battle. They had seen what loyalty looked like. Other human soldiers were being integrated into positions throughout the military. Yuna became chief communications officer for the entire fleet. Daiho was made a captain, commanding a mixed human Velkari warship. The two species were learning to work together, to think together. Velkari precision combined with human adaptability. Velkari patience combined with human courage. 1 year after the swarm first appeared, the tide had turned. The bioships were being pushed back to the edge of known space. They still adapted, still learned. But now they faced enemies who learned faster. Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, looking at a tactical display showing the front lines. Lyra stood beside him. Do you think we can win? She asked quietly. I think we can survive, Ji-hoon said. And if we survive long enough, we'll find a way to win. That's what humans do best. Survive? That, and stand by our friends. She looked at him, her skin showing colors of affection and respect. I'm glad we're friends, Ji-hoon. I'm glad your people came to the stars when they did. I'm glad fate brought us together. So am I, he said honestly. Below them, mixed crews of Velkari and humans worked at their stations. Some wore Velkari uniforms with human modifications. Others wore human uniforms with Velkari rank insignia. They spoke both languages, shared both cultures. A new generation was growing up on both worlds, learning about each other from childhood. Human children fascinated by Velkari technology. Velkari children amazed by human stories of adventure and courage. The war was far from over. The swarm was still out there, still dangerous. But now, two species faced it together. The empire that had once prized individual preservation above all else had learned a new value, loyalty. And in learning that, they had found strength they never knew existed. Ji-hoon thought back to that moment in the command center, when every human could have fled, but chose to stay. When 250 soldiers decided that one alien empress was worth protecting. That single choice had changed everything. It had changed the war, changed the empire, changed the future of two species. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't technology or numbers. Sometimes it's just the simple choice to stay when everyone else runs. To protect someone who can't protect themselves. To be human, in the best sense of that word. And in teaching the Velkari what that meant, humanity had found its place among the stars, not as servants or mercenaries, but as friends, as partners, as defenders of those who deserved defending. The Eternal Dawn sailed on through space. carrying both species toward an uncertain future. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference.